Thank you, Kathy. I want to say thank you to all of my new friends at the Guild of Charlotte Artists. Thank you to all of y'all for coming out on a drizzly night to be with us, spend some time here. And most of all, thank my longtime dealers, Gerald and Mary Melberg, without whom none of this would have been possible. Back in 2012, a film called Mud was released. And to promote the film, the studio organized a little contest in which movie houses could enter. If they were selected, then the film's star, Matthew McConaughey, would fly to that town for a screening and a little Q&A and reception afterwards. One little Midwest theater was successful. The actor flew there, and afterwards, over coffee and cake, a young man tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Excuse me, Mr. McConaughey, I'm the guy whose job it is to climb up on a ladder out in front of the theater and hang the gigantic letters on the marquee announcing the title of the film." And I gotta tell you, Mud is the best film of the year. And the actor said, well, thank you so much. We tried to, make an ensemble effort and touch a lot of people. And the guy said, yeah, 3 letters. The best film of the year. It's a full-time chore overlooking what's plain to see. The job of an artist is to always see the greatest truth in the room. And very often the greatest truth in the room is sitting right in front of us. Yet sometimes we try too hard. My eyes, having observed everything, returned to the white chrysanthemums. After 48 years of painting, I find myself returning to the things that were there all along, the simple things, the things that made me want to be a painter in the first place. My hope is that some of the things I've learned along the way might be of use to you. For me, the chrysanthemums in the poem represent what the anthropologist Clifford Geertz referred to as local knowledge. He wrote, "To know a city is to know its streets." And there's nothing more local than standing in front of a painting. Because when you stand in front of a painting, you stand in the exact same spot that the painter stood, as he or she applied each thin of skin of color over time. You see all of the emotions and decisions of the artist played out on the surface through the primacy of touch. Painting is unique in this way. Unlike other mediums such as literature, music, or dance, in which the artist modifies and edits before we experience the work, a painting bears all of the tattletale evidence of its creation, whether the one color peeking from behind another, a drip meandering from the top of the canvas to the bottom, or the ghosts of the initial drawing showing through the layers. Painting is local knowledge. And that's where I'll begin this evening, locally. Not with the city, but with its streets. We'll sink to our kneecaps in low-country pluff mud, and you'll sit next to me in my Piedmont Airlines flight when I moved from Charleston to New York almost 40 years ago. I'll also bring you into my Midtown studio and show you how a painting comes into being, and I'll offer some tips on how I manage my career. I've organized my talk into 5 parts: living, wandering, towering, showing, and working. My message is very simple. This is what I do and how I do it. Living. Yeah. Humidity made me a painter. I was born and raised in the mind-numbing heat of coastal South Carolina. My first art lessons were wandering the banks of ancient rivers like the Waccamaw, feeling warm pluff mud squirt between my toes as I ambled from one vantage point to another, desperate to contain the view for as long as possible. Long before I knew what an artist even was, I'd scoop up fistfuls of marsh mud, splat them on the dock under the savage sun, and then carefully arrange torn bits of colored paper across the muck, followed by another handful of mud. The frond-lipped tip of an oyster shell was the ideal tool for skimming those layers of translucent slime to reveal jeweled flashes of color of varying intensity depending on how hard or lightly I skimmed. I did it over and over again. Everything I needed was right there at my feet. It took me decades to recognize how much the directness and sensuality of those experiences taught me about the way a painting comes into being. Paintings are not created, they're made. Oil paint is crushed rock mixed with liquefied fat and smeared on cloth. Yet, in the hands of an artist, it can suggest light where there was darkness and space where there was flatness. We are culture's last folk artists because we make stuff by hand. To be a painter, you must do two things: look a lot and paint a lot. There are no shortcuts. Painters are born, not made. You can teach technique, but the rest is original equipment and comes with one instruction manual. Don't lose yours. Remember, your material is you. What you're selling is not what you're painting. It's who you are. So let us stand in your shoes and look through your eyes. Keep it personal. Human beings need to see each other's narratives. That's how culture is manufactured, one story at a time. The best advice I can give you this evening is to learn how to write about your work. An artist must be two people inhabiting one body, a maker and a talker. It's hip to claim that your work will speak for itself, but it won't. You have to help it. Learning to write about your work in concise language and even speak about it in front of people is as important as learning to draw and mix color, because it makes you more articulate during studio visits with dealers and collectors. It helps you to craft statements to promote your work, and most importantly, it helps you to clarify your thoughts. So here's my challenge. Try to describe your work in 5 words or less. Albert Einstein said, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. Artists, especially young artists, are under enormous pressure to try to sound intellectual. They write pages and pages of opaque art speak designed to impress dealers and collectors. I've served on dozens and dozens of juries and committees over the years, and I can tell you that the opposite is true. Simplicity is not the product of a simple mind, but rather of a mind that has the patience to organize thought and deliver it succinctly. 5 words or less. Start with the greatest truth in the room, your physical body. To inspire literally means to inhale, which refers more to the body than the mind. A painting is a meeting of skins, the skin of the viewer to the skin of the paint. Therefore, your 5 words or less should evoke a physical, bodily experience, rather than just convey information. It always comes back to the body. Why read a 5-page essay describing sweetness when you could bite into a warm raspberry-filled Krispy Kreme? That will tell you all you need to know about sweetness. It goes on. With each bite of my warm raspberry-filled Krispy Kreme, I start to wonder, at what point does it stop being a donut and start being me? An artist's job is to pay attention to the smaller truths that orbit the larger ones, each worthy of our full consideration. Sometimes pleasure is itself knowledge. When I started to write about my own work, I always began at Penguin House. Not the publisher, but the actual Penguin House at the Central Park Zoo. I did a lot of writing in there because it's cold, damp, and smells so horrible I could only scribble down 5 words before I had to run outside. My 5 words were, and still are, standing here while looking there. The entirety of my career can be summed up in those words. Content in my paintings is a direct function of how near or far away something appears from your face. For example, I paint the landscape in the same way I learned how to see it as a kid, by lying flat on the ground on my stomach with my chin in the dirt. The foreground so close, I could taste it, and the background far away. No middle ground. Seeing from a bug's eye vantage point, like this view looking down Broadway toward the Flatiron Building, instantly compresses space, kind of like closing an accordion, and makes the viewer, you, complicit in reconstructing the view. I provide the close-up and the far away. You supply the middle. And this is nothing new. The Canadian painters from the 1920s and 30s, from the Group of 7, would often eliminate the middle ground to give the viewer the feeling of being in direct proximity to the raw power of nature, with nothing in between. And, in the words of the poet Seamus Heaney, catch the heart off guard and blow it open. Imagine any landscape painting, and you'll imagine a fixed view of a place, one static vantage point looking out at the landscape. So there's automatically a built-in reference to a solitary human figure standing there experiencing the landscape. That single solitary person is actually two people simultaneously. It's the spectator and the artist. Two people twist nervous systems around one another and manufacture a third nervous system. And that's why we need artists, because that third nervous system doesn't exist. It has to be made up. And that's our job. Wandering. The only problem with art is mosquitoes. I said those words out loud as I wiped away my sweat mustache and sharpened a number 5B pencil many, many decades ago. Before I learned to paint, I taught myself how to draw live oak trees in the low country of South Carolina, mostly near Myrtle Beach. And my ritual is very simple. I sit on a bench or a chair in the tall grass under the savage sun, and I copy what's in front of me. I don't make anything up. There's no symbolism in a tree. A branch is a branch. A leaf is a leaf. What I see is what's there. What's there is what matters. The first thing a painter must possess is a built-in, bulletproof shit detector. Good ideas don't necessarily make good paintings. Under a tree, there is no anxiety of influence or pretentious art world gobbledygook, just clear and present information. Me, a tree, and bugs. To hell with art, I said out loud. Better to pay attention. When I was a kid, I could do two things well. I could pick up AM radio in my mouth, and I could pay attention. My life's greatest fortune was being born and raised in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, which, as you all know, is a resort town festooned with blinking neon lights, surrounded by some of the most ravishing landscapes on the East Coast. I paid attention, and what I saw was miraculous. Two landscapes, one natural and one artificial, colliding head-on at 200 miles an hour, colliding with such velocity that they seem to fuse into a third thing. And that elusive third thing, that visual propulsion that I still can't quite articulate, is the subject matter of my work for the last 40 years. Forcing two places that didn't go together made me a painter. Myrtle Beach in the late 70s and early 80s offered no exposure to the fine arts. The first artist I ever met was me. My art education began in Chapin Memorial Public Library, where a couple of days a month my mom dropped me off after school and I consumed the fairly small art history section, one book at a time. And I still remember it was the 700s in the Dewey Decimal System. This is actually my first show ever at the local firehouse in Myrtle Beach. My poster for Fire Prevention Week won first place, and I had to make absolutely sure that my grandparents could find me in the picture. And I'm 10 years old here, so this is the time of those library experiences. And now, as I look back on those early library days, all these years later, I realized that the greatest gift was the gift of misunderstanding. What I mean is that the value in those art books when I was 10 years old came not really from what I comprehended, but more from what I misunderstood. And what I mean is that I was 10 years old. I didn't have the intellectual capacity to understand synthetic cubism or the Chicago Imagists, but I kept turning the pages. In other words, when the transfer of information from book to brain is not entirely accurate, you start to get bored. And then your mind starts to wander, and then you start to fill in the blanks yourself. And then I started to look forward to that blissful state of boredom, and I kept turning the pages. And over time, I began to think for myself. I began to think creatively. Now, thinking creatively is not advisable if you're an air traffic controller, but for an artist, it's a job description. My point is, work beyond your understanding. Trust your sensitivity. All of the important stuff will make itself apparent at the appropriate moment, but for now, show up every single day, regardless of the results, and stay busy. I still remember a church sign way out in the country when I was a kid that read, "If you need something done, ask the busy person." I have that written on my wall.